Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's PestFacts WA webinar. This webinar has been delivered to you as part of the DPIRD Seasonal Status of Pests and Diseases Delivered to Growers project, which is a GRDC co-investment. My name is Cindy Webster, and I am the PestFacts WA project lead, and I am hosting the webinar today, and my colleague Jeanette Pratt is co-hosting. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians throughout WA and their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal community and their cultures, and to elders both past and present. The agenda for today's webinar, we first off have DPIRD Senior Research Scientist Ian Foster giving us a WA Spring Climate Outlook. We will then have DPIRD Senior Research Scientists Ciara Beard, Geoff Thomas and Kithsiri Jayasena talking to us about what foliar diseases have been occurring across the WA grainbelt to date. They'll then talk about how to manage these diseases from spring onwards. We will be having a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so please use the Q&A or the chat function to enter in any questions or comments that you may have for our presenters. We will also be recording the webinar, and the webinar recording will be placed on the DPIRD YouTube channel afterwards. I'll now hand over to Ian to start the webinar.
Good, thanks Cindy, and welcome all. The seasonal climate outlook is very simple. I'll just do a quick recap of the season climate to date and also a rain and temperature outlook for the next 2 months. Next slide, please. So thus far with the seasonal rain, which is represented by the chart on the left, that's rainfall deciles for April to July. So it does include August, so that's until the end of July. You see, it's been a story of two very distinct regions. The northern grain belt has had very much above average rainfall to date, as shown by the blue colours, because they're deciles, meaning they're well above average. Whereas much of the south, and particularly the lower south coast and Great Southern, has had a particularly dry certainly start, but the continuing rain into the end of July still was also below average. So you had this quite a different story between the north and the south. In terms of seasonal temperatures, which is the chart on the right, which shows the temperature decile, so that's just mean daily temperatures, so that includes nighttime and daytime temperatures, across the entire region. It's been very well, more than very well above average. It's in fact been in some cases highest on record. So we've had these two regions with very different rainfall patterns to date, but universally there's just been a very warm growing season. Next slide, please. A lot of this has changed in August. So this shows the percentage of average August rain that's been received until the 25th of August. So the blue colour, or the green colours, which now covers most of the ag region, means they've received 100% of their August rain or more to date. The very large area throughout the Pilbara and the inland, of course, there's very large percentage changes, but they don't get a lot of rain in August, so it doesn't take a lot of rain to actually make them above average. But the notable bits, especially for the south, was how good rain for most of August has significantly alleviated the water supply and water storage issues for a lot of the south, so that's very good. It's continued the rain for the northern grain belt, with some of the Midlands still being about on track, which is the light browny sorts of colours. But there is an area of the far northeastern wheat belt which still remains below average for August to date. So there's still a remaining pocket or two, and the very far eastern part may be the Esperance district. But in general, August has seen a significant turnaround in rain fortunes, especially for the south. Next slide, please. So when we look at the September rain and temperature outlook, this is from the Bureau of Meteorology's Access Climate Model. So it was run at the end of August. So the chart on the left shows a chance of exceeding average September rain from the model run. So the bluey colours show the model has a definite preference for that period for the southwest, but also much of the ag region to be normal or at least wetter than average. So the continuing rain we've seen in August, it just looks as though it's going to roll through into September as well. The chart on the middle is the chance of exceeding minimum nighttime minimum temperatures, and it's highly likely that you're going to, essentially that means warmer nights. That's consistent with a rain system where you've got cloud and wind and rain and that sort of thing. So that's consistent. Daytime temperatures look as though they're likely to be below normal. Again, that's consistent if you've got a rainy pattern coming through. So those three things are telling part of the same story, that the model is expecting these ongoing weather systems to be sweeping through. So that's a pretty good outlook for those who are certainly in areas of the south where they're still looking at rain to roll in well into spring to help with the soft finish. Next slide, please. So this looks at October by itself, again from the Bureau's model. And there's a marked change in the rain outlook for August. The model has a stronger preference for it being below normal. A lot of the browny areas your eyes might be drawn to are in the southern rangelands, which don't get a lot of rain in October anyway, so that's not so significant. For the agricultural region, the colours are much more neutral and or maybe a very slight shift to dry conditions. So that implies there'll still be rain in October. It's just unlikely to be a sort of wet month, but some sort of rain's likely to keep on going. So the model's got a neutral to slightly drier outlook. Mixed pattern with the temperatures. So the middle chart there showing the nighttime minimum temperatures. The whiter colours just simply means the model has a neutral outlook. So whatever you'd normally happen as minimum temperatures in October is what the model thinks is quite possible. So it's got no particular preference between warmer or cool other than the very far south coast. Daytime temperatures, the model's got a preference for the up and down the west coast, maybe being a little bit cooler than average, but not much preference elsewhere. So the probabilities are less strong than for September. Often happens when you're looking at a couple of months ahead. But in general, it suggests that the rainfall will start to wind off, as it does anyway in October, so nothing new there. So at least the good thing, it's not, as it was last year, it's not looking as though it's a hot, hard finish. So that's actually not a bad outlook. Next slide, please. So this is just looking, and when you pull out and look at the range of models that are available, there's about 15 or 16 international models that you can look at, and you can show them their preferences in a stacked bar chart. In this case, last year were the charts on the left, with this year is for the right, for each 3-month season, starting through January, February, March, through to December, January, February. And the colour codings are, if a model had a preference for it being below normal rainfall during that period, it's red. If the model didn't care, if it had a neutral outlook, it would be green, or if it had a preference for wetter conditions, it would be red. Blue, sorry. If you just eyeball that, you see how last year there was a preponderance of red bars, meaning the strong majority of models were expecting all of those seasons to have below normal rainfall, which came to pass. Looking at the 2024 summary, you can see that during late summer and getting into autumn, the majority of models expected that period to remain drier than normal, which indeed did happen. But then once you got past March and June proper, the number of models expecting drier conditions decreased, and they had more of either neutral or slightly wetter outlook. And so the rainfall prospects certainly have improved, say, from June onwards. So it's telling us the combined wisdom, if you might want to say, of the models is actually giving us some seasonal information. And the other bit, just to note that this year looks very different from last year. There's a whole set of climate reasons why that's the case. But the combined thing implies reasonable conditions going through for the rest of spring at least. The further ahead you go, clearly the model's less certain, but we update that each month. Next slide, please. So just in summary, take-home messages, a lot of you are probably well aware of this. The season of rain to the end of July was quite different between the north and the south, quite dry for the south and wetter for the north. The season to date temperature has just been warm, very warm everywhere. So that obviously brings on different implications for that. The August rain has seen a considerable turnaround, especially for the southern part of the grainbelt. The rainfall outlooks for September look pretty good. They do wind back a bit from October, but not seemingly excessively so. Temperatures in September are certainly warmer at night and cooler daytime temperatures, consistent with wetter conditions. And the October temperatures are a bit of a mixture, but they're sort of normal, perhaps cooler, but the probabilities aren't as strong. So all in all, it's quite a different and probably more encouraging outlook than we saw this time last year. So thank you, Cindy.
Thank you, Ian. Nice presentation. Good day all. Let me introduce myself, who I am before I speak. Kithsiri Jayasena, DPIRD plant pathologist based in Albany. Today I'll be talk about the disease present so far for this season in the Albany and the Esperance Sport zones and the importance of these diseases for next 2 months. The previous speaker talked about the climate outlook so far and how spring is going to be. Climate is one of the 3 factors that need to be considered when looking at diseases. The other 2 factors are host and the pathogen. If all these 3 factors are met, then the results would be disease. So you can remember, recollect 2022, what happened, 2023, what happened, now 2024. So I will be talking about what are the diseases which has been seen so far. Net form of net blotch. It's coming up from October, it will go with the current weather conditions. Loose mud is the issue this year. That will be fade away. All the infection would have happened after during the flowering time, so nothing can be done. Then powdery mildew is the issue in the south coast. Next slide, please. Barley scald is in new varieties like leprous kickstarting. When it start warming up, the impact will be lesser than the barley leaf rust, which is a warm loving pathogen which will increase during the springtime. Next slide, please. Beet powdery mildew also to be concerned. If anybody got any mildew, the samples to be sent it to CCDM for testing, and we are more concerned about that. And wheat leaf rust, also like the barley leaf rust, when it gets warm up, it will kickstart and spread much wider area. Next slide, please. Canola diseases, blackleg has been seen widely in southern part of the region. Then the sclerotinia is coming up with wet weather, closed canopy, ideal for sclerotinia infection. Then the white leaf spot. White leaf spot was early seen, but when warm up, it will be disappear. You don't need any attention for that. Next slide, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Kith. Hi, everyone. My name is Ciara Beard. I'm a plant pathologist based in Geraldton, and today I'm going to be speaking about foliar plant diseases that have been occurring in the northern region. So, as Ian has described, the north have had decile 8 to 9 conditions with rainfall this season, and so it's been extremely wet and there's been a lot of unusual things happening. So diseases as well as unexplainable other physiological things. So I thought I'd show you a few photos of some of the agronomists have been sending in some of these pictures with strange spots and things that look a bit like ring spot, but yellow spot and septoria mixed in and all kinds of things. So we're looking into all of these to see if these are actually diseases, as if they'd respond to a fungicide or not. Flag smut has been found in some early sown wheat in some places, and unusual streaking on stems as well. Next slide, please. Nodorum blotch and yellow spot on wheat are very common, and we're particularly concerned about gloom blotch because it spreads by rain splash. So this is obviously the season that it's spreading rapidly up the canopy and can cause this mottling on the glooms. This is not to be confused with pseudo black chaff, which is not actually a disease but a physiological condition associated with this a stem rust resistance gene. So in some wheat varieties this year, particularly early sown wheat varieties where we've taken these photos, you can see that it's dark brown below the head, and then the head also has some brown mottling. So that's not a disease, so that won't respond to fungicide, but we're seeing both this year. Next slide, please. Some of the other diseases that have been reported are powdery mildew in wheat, and reports have been coming in since late July. But the cool wet weather we've had may have limited its development to date, but we're concerned that with temperatures warming up in the last week or so, it could start to take off. So it's a good idea to watch any infected crops. Barley spot form net blotch is around, and sclerotinia of canola and lupin this year. Wet conditions are really favouring the disease in lupins. There's a lot of really large lupin canopies out there, and we've already started seeing the symptoms like picture on the right. The canola crops are ranging in yield potential. Some were very late to establish and may not be of higher yield potential, so really worthwhile considering that before you assume you need to put a fungicide on. In canola earlier in the season, there were all kinds of things like downy mildew and white leaf spot that were being reported, which are very rare for the north, but just a sign of how wet it really was and is still in some places. Blackleg leaf symptoms were very common, and that's also unusual for the north. That doesn't necessarily mean that you've got stem canker, but it can be a warning that you might need to consider upper canopy infection risk. And this picture on the right at the bottom from Peter Norris is showing turnip yellows virus, and that's recently been reported in PestFacts by Ben Congdon that it's been found in quite a few areas in the north from aphid causing infection from July, but the leaves are just starting to turn purple now. Finally, lupins. We've seen a lot of brown leaf spot in most crops, a bit of anthracnose in some, and with the wet spring that's possibly coming, phomopsis needs to be a consideration in your disease management. Next slide, thank you.
I just have to unmute yourself, please, Geoff.
Somebody had to do it. Apologies, everybody. Just to introduce myself, my name's Geoff Thomas. I'm a plant pathologist with DPIRD based in Perth. I'm going to talk a little bit about diseases that we've seen so far in the central region of the wheat belt. And I'm going to start out by, I guess we've seen mainly the similar diseases that both Ciara and Kith have talked about. But it is a little bit variable across the region because obviously of that variability in rainfall that Ian has described to us already. But the good rainfall outlook does suggest that some of these diseases might become problematic. So a couple of things to point out. Again, Ciara mentioned sclerotinia and canola and lupin, and certainly we've had a number of people commenting on the fact that that's just started to pop up in canola and lupin in our medium and higher rainfall western regions, the wet soil, the damp canopy, and the rainfall outlook for September, including that slightly warmer outlook, certainly favours these diseases, and so these could continue to be problematic. Ciara's spoken about blackleg in canola, and maybe we're seeing more foliar infection of that at least in this year, and maybe some of those early sown canola crops may need to look out for upper canopy infection. Kith mentioned loose smut in barley. I've certainly had a number of calls in the last 2 weeks about loose smut in barley, and particularly barley crops that were sown into dry or drying soil conditions, which means that possibly the fungicide, the seed dressing fungicide, hasn't been taken up as well, and so the disease management by that fungicide hasn't worked as well in some varieties, and so nothing we can do this season about that, but certainly going into next season, it's something to be aware of, particularly given this the good outlook that there will be good transmission, and so we need to be choosing our seed from the lowest infected paddock. Maybe these are paddocks that were slightly later sown where the seed dressing maybe was more effective, and be looking to use seed dressing going into 2025 to limit that transmission next year. Again, Kith mentioned scald of barley. It's something that we don't usually see a lot of, but there has been an increasing incidence, particularly as we tend to use more susceptible varieties. But also worth noting that there is virulence out there for Maximus and Spartacus, and so it's something to keep an eye on in terms of whether or not we're getting any scald in those crops. Net blotches of barley, been a slow start, I think, for many crops, and so maybe they've been a bit slow to get going. But certainly this recent wet weather and the ongoing wet weather does suggest that there will be conditions that will favour the spread of those diseases. And certainly I think maybe they could reach damaging levels in the higher rainfall environments of where we're maybe sowing a susceptible variety like Planet for something like net form, net blotch, one to keep an eye on. Ciara's mentioned mildew, and there's been a number of reports of mildew lowering canopies. Bit of a late start, I think, this year, which might limit the impact of mildew, or maybe just allow us to be a little bit more strategic in our timing of control as many crops are approaching that flag leaf stage, and maybe we can be a bit more strategic about how we get optimum timing of fungicide for managing mildew. Thanks, Cindy. So, I mean, that's a quick outline of what the sort of reports that we've been making or receiving into PestFacts. But I guess at this point in the season, having followed a good integrated disease management program to here, foliar fungicide is probably the remaining integrated disease management tool in our toolkit. The question is, in a season like this particularly, is should we be applying foliar fungicide or not, and what are the things that we need to be considering? Well, Kith talked about the disease triangle. One of those is obviously the outlook for the spring weather, and Ian's told us that it's going to be wet and warm, and these are ideal conditions for fungal diseases. I mean, the wet weather provides infection opportunities, and the warmer conditions tend to decrease latent periods, increase the number of infection cycles that might occur. So certainly the outlook is that the spring will be a little bit softer and certainly favourable for some of those foliar fungal diseases. What diseases are present? Is disease present? That'll help in determining whether you need to spray. Not all crops will need spraying. And then confirming the diagnosis, making sure that it's not one of these physiological spots or false black chaff or some of the nutritional symptoms that are certainly occurring given the up and down rainfall this year. What's the yield potential? Is it actually worth protecting the crop? Is the crop going to yield enough to make that worthwhile? The current growth stage. Now, as I said, particularly for our central and southern audience, crops are probably approaching that optimum time to apply a fungicide. And so what is the current growth stage? And if we look forward into 3 or 4 weeks' time, how long is left in the growing season? Is there a likelihood that you will need to apply another fungicide? Is there long enough left in the season for that to be effective? Prioritising crops. Is the crop in a high disease scenario? Is it a susceptible variety? For example, is it Planet barley with net form net blotch in the middle of the canopy? Is it a barley on barley or a wheat on wheat scenario? Prioritise those high risk crops first. And then, I guess we've been following all these IDM strategies and it's asking the question, is the fungicide actually necessary? And I guess the question that you'd ask yourself is that fungicide actually going to pay for itself? Is it worth applying? Will it make you any money? Thanks, Cindy. So in terms of fungicide applications for wheat, we're going to drill down a little bit to be a bit more specific. Fungicide applications for wheat. What are we looking for? We're looking to target the top 3 leaves, the upper part of the canopy. We want to protect those leaves and make sure that they are as disease-free as possible. What's the best timing? Well, the best timing is obviously when all those upper canopy leaves are out, so flag leaf emergence and beyond, probably through to about that sort of Z55 half-year emergence. And then as required, if you can hold off a little bit and protect and protect some of that upper stem, and then all the better. As Ciara mentioned, this has been a favourable season so far for Nodora and gloom blotch, and so that half-year emergence spray is probably a classic to try and reduce the impact of that gloom blotch on maybe some of those earlier sown susceptible varieties. There are tools available to help you with your decision making, and certainly the Yellow Spot WM tool is helpful to determine the likely outcome for spraying for some of those necrotrophic leaf spotting diseases like yellow spot or nodorum. For the biotrace, for the leaf rust and powdery mildew, as Kith said, as the season warms up a bit, they will rapidly move along. Monitor. Be ready to apply fungicide if the epidemic develops, particularly in those susceptible varieties, maybe up until around the flowering period. But that again, it's a case of, is the disease present and are the conditions remaining conducive? Thanks, Cindy. In barley, very much similar to wheat, except for probably the leaves we're looking to protect might be, in many barley varieties, the flag leaf is not as prominent, and so we're sort of looking for that flag -1 and flag -2. So often the best single application time may be from a little bit earlier when the flag -1 is fully emerged, so that Z37 time, through to that booting to early head emergence time, depending on the disease pressure and the length of the season that you're expecting. Obviously, in some circumstances, if this rain continues to occur, we might see some higher disease pressure environments, particularly in our western and southern zones. And so if you've got a susceptible variety, there might be a requirement for a 2-spray strategy, and maybe we're looking at getting on, if the disease is developing now, getting on earlier, and then coming back in 3 or 4 weeks' time. And much like the wheat, the leaf rust and barley, powdery mildew is a monitor and active required. Thanks, Cindy.
Thanks, Geoff. So in terms of canola, we'll be talking about sclerotinia and upper canopy blackleg. So this is the chart showing you the different bloom stages in canola, because it is quite hard to identify. But a crop said to be at a particular growth stage once half of the plants have reached this picture at the top. So the target for sclerotinia is protecting the main stem from falling infected petals, and fungicide has to be applied prior to symptoms. And the particular risk of paddocks with known history of sclero in the past. For blackleg, for upper canopy blackleg, which is quite different to canker, you need to protect the flowers, the branches and the pods and the upper stem. So the good news is that application timing for both is best around 20 to 30% bloom, and the latest you'd put a fungicide on canola is 50%. And so that's important to read the labels because you really have to consider withholding periods with canola. So in a recent AFREN webinar, Steve Marcroft from Marcroft Grains Pathology reminded us that crops that are most at risk of upper canopy blackleg yield loss are those that were sown early and flowered early. So that's crops that were flowering in June and July because the vascular tissue has to be infected, and then there has to be time for it to actually cause yield loss. So just keep that in mind if you had crops flowering that early, but I know in the north anyway, everything's a bit later. So though there are leaf infections, maybe it's not necessarily going to cause upper canopy infection. So we recommend that you use the decision support tools, Sclerotinia CM and the upper canopy blackleg CM tools. These are data-driven disease forecasts that allow you to estimate return on investment from a fungicide spray for your specific conditions. Okay, next slide, please. Sclerotinia in lupins is a particular concern this year for canopies that are really thick in places that are very moist and where there's a history of sclerotinia. So the target is protecting the main spike pods, and this is how it differs to the timing that you apply fungicide for canola. So our research has found that you're more likely to get a yield response if there's a wet spring and if other diseases are present. So things like phomopsis and anthracnose will also be managed by this timing spray. And if you want further information, we've got a risk assessment guide that's available on the GRDC website. Next slide, please. So just wrapping up, as we've said and we've heard from Ian, there's a reasonable expectation this year that you could get a yield response in areas that have crops of good yield potential and that outlook for a good soft finish. So rather than just assuming to put fungicide on everything, we recommend you use decision support tools that we've outlined here. And based on what diseases you observe this year, it's a good idea to start planning now for how you'll manage your diseases next year, particularly looking for the long-term things like selecting better varieties with good disease resistance profiles to a range of diseases are a really good way to manage diseases, reducing pathogen build-up and reducing your need for fungicide. Thank you, Cindy.
Thanks very much, Ciara. And for our audience, you can go and have a visual look at what the PestFacts team has been receiving this year in terms of pests and diseases by going and having a look at the PestFacts WA map. We also have a reporting app where if you would like to share with us what diseases you are finding in your paddocks so that we can alert other growers, or if you're not sure of what you're finding and you would like a free diagnosis, you can use our PestFacts WA Reporter app to do this. And this app can be downloaded for free from the App Store and Google Play. And that brings us to the question and answer session of our webinar. So I'm just going to have a quick look and see if we have received any for our presenters. And everyone feel free to use the Q&A or chat function if you think of a question. If you think of something afterwards, feel free to email the PestFacts email address and I can forward the question along. And Geoff, I have a question for you. I know you mentioned the prevalence of smut could be sowing dry and having the seed coating not holding up, but is there more to it? It seems to be a very bad this year, or is it just the increased moisture this year spreading it? Is there a breakdown in the efficacy of the seed dressings available?
Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Annika, for the question. Firstly, this is a hypothesis based on previous experience. The suggestion would be that the reason why I've suggested it's a reduced efficacy is that the reports I've received have said that there are a number of different seed dressings that are being ineffective. So in other words, if it was a breakdown of a particular seed dressing, we might expect to see reports coming in from about just that seed dressing. It does seem that a number of different products, DMIs, SDHIs, carboxamides maybe have been less effective than hoped. The seasonal conditions might help with expression, but certainly don't spread the disease and cause more disease this year. However, the wet period that we've had and the ongoing wet conditions that Ian has promised us do mean that we are looking at a year for good transmission, and so therefore we would expect to be harvesting at least a significant level of seed infection for next year, and so we should be treading there. I would expect that in fact all of our seed dressings are still effective. If we're particularly concerned, then samples, I guess we could be sampling and looking into whether their resistance exists.
Thanks, Geoff. We now have a barley leaf smut question from David Peake. If we have a drier start again in 2025, even though seed is treated by grower, can infection get worse, above 5 to 10% infection, and make the seed unusable?
Thanks, David. Absolutely. This is a favourable season for disease transmission into the clean seed, let's say, and so we would expect to maintain that level of infection or even increase it. And so yes, we could expect that this is a season which we will see harvesting of infected seed. if we have a particularly similar, if this hypothesis is correct and we have a similar start, then yes, we could expect to see the same. Will we see it get to 5 to 10%? I'm uncertain about that. And if it is at those sort of levels, then yes, replacement of seed is one of the options for addressing the issue. It should be remembered that if you go out into a paddock and have a look, and it is a very obvious disease, and if we look at 1 plant per square metre at a seeding rate of 150 plants per square metre, that's less than 1% infection occurring. And certainly 1 plant per square metre is quite a horrendous looking look in the paddock. So often we are at slightly lower infection rates than we think. However, it is an important thing to harvest from a lower infection areas of the paddock, or lower infection paddocks, to help with our seed infection rate.
Thanks very much, Geoff, and thank you for those questions, everyone. It looks like we don't have any current questions, but again, please feel free to send them through via the PestFacts email address if you think of some afterwards. The webinar recording will be put on the DPIRD YouTube channel, and we'll put the PowerPoint slides on the PestFacts webpage afterwards. And please feel free to follow us on the PestFacts WA posts on the DPIRD Broadacre X account. And that brings us to the end of the webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending today and asking questions, and it's been great having you here with us. I'd like to thank our presenters, Ian, Kith, Ciara and Geoff. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you, Jeanette, for co-hosting. And we'll say goodbye for now, and we hope everyone has a nice rest of the day. Thanks, everyone.